All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here today. My name is Amy Kuhn. I'm the Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Sara Jacobs. And we are thrilled and grateful that you are choosing to spend even a little bit of your Saturday afternoon with us. We will be hosting town halls throughout the year using different platforms and locations throughout the district, different times of the day and week to try to reach and accommodate as many people as possible. With that, I want to turn it over to Congresswoman Jacobs to say a few words before we get started.
Well, hi, everybody. It is so great to be here with you all. Thank you so much for joining this town hall. I have loved being in San Diego this week. I'm not looking forward to going back to DC tomorrow. We'll have 3 weeks of legislative session coming up. But I'm happy to be here with you all right now. So, the purpose of this town hall is really to give you an update on what's happening and answer questions for you. Last month, we had a telephone town hall, and next month, we'll be having one in person. But obviously, with everything going on, a lot is happening. So, we want to make sure we're keeping you as up to date as possible. So, just this week, as I've been home here in San Diego, um, we have done a lot to highlight what is happening in Washington and how we're pushing back. So, just a few of the highlights that I've done while I've been here in San Diego this week. I visited Rady's Children's Hospital with Senator Alex Padilla to hear directly from healthcare providers and families about the impact of the cuts to Medicaid that Republicans are proposing. The budget proposal that they have passed calls for anywhere between $880 billion in cuts to $2.5 trillion in cuts to Medicaid. While we were having this listening session, I met 5-year-old Delilah. She was a delight. She was the best. She has a number of health conditions, 28 health-related conditions, and a developmental delay. And the only way she's able to get the health care that she needs is through Medicaid. We call it Medi-Cal here in California. Um, so, we're pushing back hard on that. 1 in 6 people in San Diego County actually rely on Medicaid. It covers about 40% of all children, 40% of all births, and it covers a whole range of folks, whether it's elder people, people with disabilities who need long-term care, people with mental health and substance use disorders, kids, pregnant moms, low-income families. I also met with SEIU United Healthcare workers who are on the front lines of our healthcare system about how it's so important to protect Medicaid and how it would make their job a lot more difficult without Medicaid happening or without Medicaid. And then in addition to talking about Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, which we know the Trump administration has in their sights, I also met with small business owners across the district to talk about the impact of tariffs on their businesses. We know that part of what is hard is even the uncertainty around the tariffs, right? They've been on, they've been off, they've been on, they've been off again. And we know this is having a real impact on small businesses in the district. I actually, for the joint address to Congress that President Trump did, which is what we call State of the Union in a president's first year in office, I brought Kiana Schleman, a local small business owner, as my guest to highlight the impact these tariffs have. And she told me that if the tariffs are fully implemented, her business would lose around 30% of their profit, which we know for many, many folks is just means that their business is going to go under. Also, this week, the Trump administration issued an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. I met with students at USD to talk about what this would mean for them. A lot of them are very, very concerned about their Pell Grants, their federal student loans. It's the only way that they have been able to go to college. I've also heard from so many parents of kids in K through 12 schools about what this will mean for their kids, and especially kids with special needs who get extra funding from the federal government. So we're going to be pushing back hard on that. And then I also met with the Scripps Institute to talk about the cuts to NIH and NSF funding and what that will mean for them and their research and how that research is so important for all of us. If you have been following the news, you probably heard all of the conversation about the budget and funding and the continuing resolution, what we call a CR. It was passed through the House and the Senate last week, which means that the government is funded through September 30th, and we now are going to start working on the FY26 funding bills. But I voted against this bill because I am very concerned about some of what was in there, including cuts to veterans care, cuts to rent subsidies, cuts to the Army Corps of Engineer construction projects. And I am very disappointed that some Senate Democrats, not ours, our two senators, did the right thing, but some Senate Democrats gave our leverage away for free and helped Republicans to pass this continuing resolution. I think it was a real missed opportunity to be able to push back on the Trump administration, but we're going to keep looking for other ways to do that and are ready to go for the fights that continue. So, the last thing I want to talk about before we get to your questions is immigration. Obviously, here in San Diego, we are a border community. And so, a lot of what's happening on immigration and the border really impacts us directly. I'm very, very concerned about what the administration is doing using the Alien Enemies Act. It's a 1798 law that was used actually to create Japanese internment camps. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the bill that would repeal this. But in the meantime, I'm pushing back hard and trying to make sure that we are getting all of the answers to our questions about how this is being used and all of that. We've also seen activists who the administration doesn't agree with being arrested and detained by ICE, having their visas revoked. This is really, really concerning because everyone in the US has constitutional protections, regardless of their documentation status. And so we're pushing back hard on that. And I actually went to Guantanamo Bay a couple weeks ago now on a bipartisan oversight delegation to see what was happening there. I'll be honest with you, after seeing it, I think it's very clear that there was no operational reason to be sending people there. Donald Trump just wanted to be able to say that he was sending immigrants to Guantanamo Bay with its horrible history of human rights abuses. And after our oversight visit, they actually moved all of the immigrants who were there back to the continental United States, I think, because even the Republicans realized there was no real reason for the cost and the cruelty. So I know that a lot of what we are hearing right now and a lot of what I just went through is really bleak. I know a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed and anxious and frustrated and helpless. I want to remind you that they are doing these things in this way to make us feel that way. But we are not helpless. We actually have tools to push back, and it's going to take all of us pushing back to be able to. So, as I said in our last town hall, as you've probably heard from me in all the various ways I try and communicate with you all, House Democrats are pushing back on four fronts. We are doing our constitutionally mandated oversight job, showing up, making sure that we understand what's happening, we're asking the right questions. They know that we are watching. We are introducing legislation to try and push back on these really dangerous things that they're doing. And we only need 3 Republicans to vote with us to be able to get that legislation done. Congress doesn't have standing to sue, but we are working with outside partners on court cases and filing amicus briefs, other things. Some of the oversight questions directly feed into the litigation, trying to help in any way we can on that strategy. And then the fourth and most important part where you all come in is the public pressure. And we've actually seen that public pressure has been successful. And so just recently, a federal judge blocked President Trump's ban on transgender service members. A judge issued a temporary restraining order to block Trump from deporting hundreds of Venezuelans under the Alien Enemies Act. Yes, we know Trump ignored the court order, but I think it's important that the court order happened, and now we're pushing Republicans to stand up and respect the courts because they have privately told me that their red line is Trump not abiding by a court order. We've also had a judge rule that firing federal workers in the way that it was done was illegal, and now 18 federal agencies are working to bring back 25,000 fired federal workers. A federal judge blocked Doge from firing any more USAID employees or terminating USAID contracts, writing that the efforts there are likely unconstitutional. And a federal judge has blocked Doge from accessing Social Security data of millions of people. So we are not helpless. we have agency here. We get to decide. And we are having some successes in the courts with public pressure, with our oversight. Obviously, we all want to be pushing back more, and I'm constantly looking for more creative ways to be pushing back as much as I can. But I hope that that update was helpful. And now we're going to open it up to questions. I know a lot of you sent questions in when you registered for the event. So we're going to start with some of those. But if you have a question, if you're watching on Zoom, you can put it in the Q&A section or type it in the comment section below this video if you're watching on Facebook. And my team is monitoring all of those and make sure that Amy is receiving them in real time so that we can try and get to all of your questions. So with that, Amy, over to you for our first questions.
All right. As the Congresswoman mentioned, a good number of folks did pre-submit questions, so we'll start with those to give them an opportunity. Let's see. Okay, so we'll start with a question that's on a lot of folks' minds, which is about Elon Musk and Doge, which Congresswoman you just mentioned. Justine S. asks, how can we get Elon Musk out of the government? How can the Democrats organize to mobilize a unified and effective defense against the chaos of the Trump administration? What can we do to ensure Social Security is safe for elders, disabled folks, and folks living in poverty?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think, we're even seeing people be concerned about Elon Musk's role in this government from across the political spectrum. To me, this isn't political. This is about, who actually is running our government. House Democrats have introduced legislation that would protect against Elon Musk's access to sensitive treasury payment systems. That's a mouthful. Sensitive treasury payment systems and Social Security data. And we only need 3 Republicans to vote with us to be able to address that. There's also a number of other bills that we've introduced that would, for instance, mandate Elon Musk actually have to file the financial disclosures that all elected officials and appointed officials normally have to fill out so that we understand his conflicts of interest, and tries to constrain what Doge and Elon Musk can do. Again, we need 3 Republicans to vote with us to be able to get those done. I will say a big part of the recent USAID lawsuit that I mentioned that said that Doge's efforts to dismantle USAID were unconstitutional was in part because Elon Musk was not actually appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate in the way that the Constitution prescribes. And we've also seen, as I mentioned this week, a federal judge blocked Elon Musk's access to Social Security. And while the Trump administration is not following all court orders, we believe this one we're seeing evidence that they are actually abiding by this court order, and Doge no longer have access to that really, really sensitive data. But one thing that you all can do actually that would be really helpful is that each of you individually can file a FOIA request asking Doge what information they have accessed about you. And then once you find that out, send that information that you've found out. Like if they've accessed your Social Security, don't send us your Social Security number, please. But send us if they've accessed your Social Security number, etc. Send that to us. That is really helpful to us in being able to understand exactly what Doge has accessed and what they continue to access. So we'll put information on our website coming up about how you can do that FOIA request. But please, that is one way that you can really help us do our constitutional oversight job.
Oh, great. Similar topic. Sandra R. asks, how is the government complying with the WARN Act when firing federal employees? Who is making sure the law is complied with?
So this is a really good question because, in fact, the federal government is currently not abiding by the WARN Act. For those of you who don't know, the WARN Act is a bill that requires 90 days notification if there's going to be mass layoffs. This has actually been the basis of some of these lawsuits that we've seen be successful. So again, as I mentioned in the opening, a federal judge ruled this week that firing federal workers in the way that they have is illegal. And so now we're seeing 18 agencies bringing back 25,000 25,000 workers back into the federal workforce. If you are a federal worker who lives in our district, we'd love to hear your story. On my website, sarajacobs.house.gov, we do have a place where you can put in your story, either if you're a federal worker or you've been impacted by any of what's happening. Your stories are really, really helpful in giving me what I need to be able to push back when I go back to Washington.
All right. Pamela S. asks, what are Democrats doing to stop the illegal activities of the Trump administration? How effective are the phone calls to your office and that of other Congresspeople? Do they really make a difference?
So the phone calls are really, really important. I love hearing from you all. Please call me. It helps me a lot to know what's on your mind. You can call us. You can also send us emails on the website, sarajacobs.house.gov, or leave comments on our social media. We monitor those as well. Um, I will say, I love hearing from you. For the most part, probably if you're concerned about Doge and Elon Musk, we agree. So one of the things I'm also advising people is making sure you're talking to your friends and neighbors, especially your friends who live in other congressional districts, to make sure they understand what's happening and they understand the impact all of this is having on you. We found one of the best tools that we have to combat the mis and disinformation is real personal conversations with people that folks trust, and then have them call their representatives because we need to make sure that, all of our representatives from across the political spectrum are hearing from their constituents about these issues.
All right. We've received quite a few questions asking about Democrats' strategy and messaging right now. A good number of them are asking that in relation to what happened with the continuing resolution you mentioned earlier. Maybe to start, for those who don't know, can you give an overview of the debate that was happening within the Democratic Party around the CR?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to give you all a little bit of how things are supposed to work, normally we pass 12 bills funding the government. Sometimes we put them together in what's called an omnibus, and they fund the government from September 30th to September 30th. That's not what happened this time. What happened this time is we passed in September a continuing resolution, which it just says instead of a new funding bill that you should continue what you were doing in the prior year till the end of the year, so till December. And then House Republicans, who were in charge, decided to pass another continuing resolution until March 16th. So that's why we were having this funding fight in March, which is not normally when we have these conversations around funding. So what a continuing resolution normally says is just continue what you've done from the previous year. What we have in the broader appropriations bills is even more specifics on what we want the administration, the executive branch to do, some more about congressional intent, right? We can put a lot more in those funding bills because they're much bigger. What Republicans introduced in March was what they called a continuing resolution, a CR, but actually was a very partisan spending bill because rather than just saying continue what you were doing before, it actually had big cuts to veterans' health care, to Social Security workers, to rent subsidies, to a lot of things that are really important. And because it's a continuing resolution, it also didn't have all of that language about what we want the executive branch to do and the role of Congress in the power of the purse as the Constitution gives us. So we in the House decided, the House Democratic Caucus, that this was a bad bill. We did not want this bill to pass. And so by and large, House Democrats stayed unified and we voted against this bill because what we wanted was to force the Republicans to come to the table and actually have a bipartisan negotiation with us around what a spending bill should actually look like. Unfortunately, House Republicans are in the majority, so they were able to pass this without our votes. It went to the Senate, and Senate Democrats filibustered it. And unfortunately, Chuck Schumer and a number of Senate Democrats, 8 of them, voted with Republicans to break the Democratic filibuster and allow this bill to be passed. Now, I should say both of our California senators did the right thing and voted the right way. They voted against breaking the filibuster. So our 2 senators did the right thing. But unfortunately, a number of senators on our side did not. And that's why the bill was allowed to pass. Now, their argument was that in a shutdown, which is true, in a shutdown, the president gets to decide what is considered essential and what keeps going and what gets shut down. And they were worried that actually that gave the president more power than passing this continuing resolution. And while I understand that argument, I don't think it's right. I think it was a false choice between this continuing resolution and a shutdown. I think we needed to force the Republicans to come to the table and have an actual bipartisan agreement with us on the way forward if they wanted our votes. But unfortunately, we weren't able to make that happen because a number of Senate Democrats did not stand strong.
So on that topic, Andrew T. And Alice C. had questions about Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's role in passing the CR. Andrew asks, says, please support the push for more progressive ideas similar to how Ro Khanna, Bernie, AOC, and Walz are doing. The question is, do you plan on pressuring Schumer to step down? It's clear he is not for the working class. Alice adds, I recognize Congresswoman Jacobs is not in the Senate, but I urge her to join Rep. Glenn Ivey. He got a similar question during a town hall this week. And others in calling for Schumer to step down from his leadership role. We need fighters who understand the stakes of the moment, not accommodationists. How will the passage of the CR affect the ability of Congress to fight back against the actions of the Trump administration?
So I am incredibly angry at Chuck Schumer and the decision that he made with a number of Senate Democrats to roll over. I think it was the wrong call. I think it eroded our leverage to be able to do what we needed to do to push back. I think he gave away those votes for nothing. And honestly, if I was in the Senate, I probably would not vote for him to remain leader. I'd be looking for new leadership. But I am not in the Senate, and I trust our senators who have done the right thing, who did vote against this filibuster, and who I know agree with us to make those decisions from themselves. I'll be honest, I don't really like when people who aren't in the House tell me how to do my job, so I try not to tell them how to do their job. But I am incredibly frustrated and angry about this. And those of you who follow me on social media know that immediately as this was happening, posted a video calling out Chuck Schumer and saying this was the wrong call. If you don't follow me on social media, I'm on Rep. Sara Jacobs on all the different sites, and that's where we put out information the most quickly. But I think this was the wrong call, and it really took away one of our best opportunities to be able to push back on the Trump administration. Some of the things that we are worried about is that this could hurt our litigation efforts because now there is a bipartisan imprimatur on what the administration is doing. It also, cuts a lot of funding that we think is important. And so I am furious with those Senate Democrats who let this pass. And unfortunately, I do think it's going to have real harmful consequences.
All right. One of the town halls of your colleagues was mentioned earlier. So on the topic of town halls, I'm combining questions from a few folks here. There's Christopher S., there's Donald W. When will you have an in-person town hall? Why do you not have an in-person town hall? And then Katie A. adds, do you support activism and the disappointment of constituents that Democrats are doing nothing to fight for our democracy? After 75 years, I plan to drop my Democratic affiliation.
I share your frustration. As many of you know, my whole thing is that we need a new generation of leaders to be doing things in a new way. And I think we need to be pushing back stronger and harder. And I am working to get my colleagues to do the same thing. On the question of town hall, so we are having a town hall every month. We had last month a telephone town hall, this month, this virtual town hall. And then next month, we're going to have an in-person town hall. It's going to be on April 22nd in El Cajon. Make sure you follow along my newsletter, my website, my social media. We'll be posting all of the details on how to register for that. But part of why we do it in all of these different ways is actually because we want to make sure we're reaching as many different constituents as possible. And something we hear from a lot of constituents, particularly older folks who have a hard time leaving the house or parents with young kids, is that in-person town halls are not very accessible for them. They have a hard time attending them. And so we're trying to use all of these different modes to reach out to all different kinds of people, different times of day, different days of the week, just so that we are accessible as possible to as many different people and not only people who can show up on a weeknight, for instance, to an in-person town hall, which really is only a limited number of our constituents. So we hope we are being as accessible as possible. You can, of course, always call or email me. Our email is at our website, sarajacobs.house.gov, as is our phone number, 619-280-5353. I love hearing from you. We try and answer everybody, so please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, jumping to some policy specific questions now. Claire K asks, how can we protect the work of other aid agencies like MCC, that is the Millennial Challenge Corporation, which was formed by Congress in 2004? How do we protect the work of aid agencies like MCC from being eroded by private interests? How can we better organize and affect change to prevent federal agencies from pre-complying?
Okay, this is a very, very important and good question. And many of you know that I serve as the ranking member, which is the highest ranking Democrat on the subcommittee that oversees USAID, MCC, foreign assistance. I am the ranking member on the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa and Global Development and Global Health. So we are looking at this question really closely and trying to work with all of the different agencies, the African Development Foundation, MCC, others, to make sure we understand what they're getting from Trump and Elon Musk, and also making sure they know they have congressional support. I actually have a bill that protects that from the dismantling of USAID. It uses Marco Rubio's own words against him. To say that, you know, USAID can only be dismantled by an act of Congress, and any reform of USAID should be done consistent with law. If I'd introduced this bill in December, we would have had broad bipartisan support. Unfortunately, I cannot get a single Republican to sign on to this now, but we are going to keep working. On MCC specifically, so for those of you who don't know, MCC works in a way where they do 5-year compacts with different countries. And those compacts are big dollar amounts, but come about only if those countries are able to reach certain threshold criteria. One of the things we've actually heard from some folks in the administration is that they actually want to turn more of our foreign assistance into an MCC-like model. And so to me, hopefully that means that they are going to spare MCC, which actually was created by George W. Bush, was a Republican creation. But we are continuing to work closely with folks at MCC and try and push back as much as we can and monitor this really closely.
Alrighty. There are two questions I will give you together because they are similar, a similar topic. Michelle L. asks, how are you protecting the free speech of citizens, green card holders, and visa holders to protest policy? Why is Mahmoud Khalil still in a detention center? And Alex M. asks, I'm deeply concerned about many of the destructive actions the Trump administration is taking, particularly ignoring habeas corpus and any due process involved in deporting disappearing alleged terrorists to a brutal El Salvador prison. What is the Democratic Party doing, and what can we as citizens do to stop the Trump administration and the GOP's attacks on our civil rights?
Okay, these are two very, very important questions. So the first thing is, if you are an immigrant or unsure about your rights, on our website, sarajacobs.house.gov, we have a Know Your Rights page that outlines what your rights are. And an important thing to note is that everyone in the United States, whether you are documented or not, has constitutional protections to due process, constitutional protections to free speech, even if it's speech we don't like or don't agree with. Those apply to everyone on US soil, not only to US citizens. And so if you aren't sure, please go to our website. We also have some resources linked on there to make sure you know what rights you have as someone living in the United States. On Mahmoud Khalil specifically, I have spoken out very strongly against this. I feel it's really important to speak out against this in part because I'm a Jewish American and they are doing it in the name of protecting Jewish Americans. And I am very, very angry that they are very cynically using the very real rise in anti-Semitism to do some of the things that they're doing around, free speech, around cutting university funding. And I think it's important that all of us speak up, but especially those of us in the Jewish community speak up against this. We are pushing back on the detention of Mahmoud Khalil. There was a letter that a number of us signed asking for more information, requesting what laws they are, trying to use, what basis they are holding him under. Um, I am similarly very concerned about the use of the Alien Enemies Act, which is the authority that Donald Trump is using in order to send these Venezuelans to the prison in El Salvador. Actually, I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that would get rid of this act. It's from 1798. It shouldn't be on our books anymore because it can be misused, like we are seeing happen right now. Um, and one of the things I'm most concerned about, well, I'm concerned about two things. One is that these Venezuelans were not given any due process. So the Trump administration is alleging that they are members of a gang. We have no way of knowing if that's true. We have no way of knowing if there were folks here legally. We have no way of knowing, um, you know, whether these folks are who the Trump administration says they are because they did not get due process. The second thing that is really concerning here is that a judge ordered them to sending these Venezuelans because this was likely illegal and unconstitutional. And the Trump administration openly defied that court order and continued sending folks um, to El Salvador. And this to me is really, really concerning because the combination of what we see them doing on free speech, what we see them doing on due process, and then not following court orders is a really dangerous slide. And it's very concerning. Now, many of my Republican colleagues have privately told me that the Trump administration not abiding by court orders is their red line. So I am pushing them now to stand up and speak up because we're going to need them working with us to push back. But one of the most important things we can do, they are doing this to make us afraid. They are doing this to make us self-censor. And so it's really important that we don't give in to that and that we continue speaking up, we continue speaking out, and we all recognize that speech is protected whether we agree with it or not. And so, especially those of us who this is being done in our name to protect, continue speaking up and speaking out, saying that we do not agree with these actions.
Okay, here's a question from Jennifer W. about LGBTQ plus rights. Will California remain a safe state for LGBTQ people? Will our schools still have DEI and appropriate funding with DOE dollars? How are we keeping trans people safe?
This is a really this one is close to my heart. As many of you know, my youngest sibling is trans and my middle sibling is gender nonconforming, and I am the co-chair of the Trans Equality Task Force in Congress. Um, so we are looking at all of the different ways that we can be protecting LGBTQ plus folks in this country. I have a bill that would protect against the trans troop ban, and I was really happy to see a judge order that ban to stop, saying that it was, there was no basis for it. One of the things that has been hardest for me is hearing from so many LGBTQ plus young people from our district and across the country who are so scared and worried, and like I can't even imagine what the impact of hearing the things that some of my colleagues and the Trump administration say it has on their mental health. So first of all, for all of our trans folks, for all of our LGBTQ folks, and especially our young people, know that there are people fighting for you. There are people in DC fighting for you, and you are perfect just the way you are. Do not listen to the horrible things that some of my colleagues and Donald Trump are saying. They are wrong. They are wrong. and I'm here, and there are many of us here who are fighting. Now, I'm hopeful that here in California, our state government will be able to protect against many of these things. We know actually since Trump has been inaugurated, the state legislature has passed a number of additional protections for LGBTQ plus folks. But I would encourage you to call your state legislatures, call the governor's office, because it's really, really important that our state continues being a leader on this.
All right, next question is from Jonathan H., who asked, how are you and other Democrats working with Republicans to create a balanced budget and reduce the federal deficit?
Well, this is this is an interesting question because while many of my Republican colleagues talk about the deficit a lot, actually the budget proposal that they voted on, that they voted for, would actually increase the deficit by $4 trillion. And if you look at what has been the biggest contributors to our national debt over the past many years, it's been mostly the first Trump tax cuts and the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. And this bill that they are proposing would add an additional $4 trillion to the debt. And so I'm actually working to push back on this budget proposal because I think it makes no sense to add $4 trillion to our debt in order to give tax cuts to wealthy people and big corporations. That's not going to do anything to grow our economy that in many cases, these folks aren't even asking for, while cutting services for people who really, really need it. Services like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. So we are pushing back hard on this. Now, the way that I think about the deficit is that if you were a business owner, you would take out a loan in order to make an investment in your company that will grow your company, right? A CapEx investment, something like that. And so the way we should be thinking about federal spending is what are the kinds of investments we should be making? And to me, there are some pretty clear things. For instance, for every $1 we spend on quality early child education, so childcare, we actually save the federal government $6 down the road because of lower costs of health, of criminal justice needs, of education needs. Additionally, our economy already loses hundreds of billions of dollars because people can't join the workforce because of this lack of care. And so to me, this is a kind of investment that we should be making. The return on investment is very high, and it makes sense to be spending money on things like that. Unlike things like big tax cuts for wealthy people and big corporations that we have now seen categorically do not actually grow our economy and do not actually help the broad base of people in our country be able to live successful, thriving lives.
All right, next question is from Sam A., who asks, what are you going to do to better balance cost of living inflation and the 40 years of real wage stagnation?
So, Sam, you will be unsurprised to know that the number one thing I hear from constituents in our district is about the cost of living. It is too expensive to live here in San Diego. It has long been too expensive to live here in San Diego, and it's only gotten worse. So, I am really, really focused on how we bring down the cost of living for families here in San Diego. Particularly childcare, as I just talked about, we know for too many families, childcare is simply unaffordable. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter if my constituents are a Democrat or Republican, no party preference. If they have kids, they are calling me about the cost of childcare. In many cases, we're seeing people pay sometimes more than rent or their mortgage on childcare here in San Diego, sometimes 40, 60% of their income on childcare. And that's if they can even find a childcare provider. So I'm really focused on this, making sure we are building more childcare, we're making it more affordable, we are making the investments we need. Housing in San Diego is really expensive. We recently beat LA and San Francisco as the most expensive place to buy a home. That is not what I meant when I said beat LA, guys. I was talking about the Padres. But here we are. And so one of the things that is frustrating about housing for me is that a lot of the levers to fix this, to address this problem, are really at the state and local level. But we are looking at all of the different creative things we can do from the federal government to be able to bring down the cost of housing here in San Diego. And if you have ideas on what we can be doing, please send them to me because we are always looking for good, creative ideas on how we can be bringing down the high cost of housing and addressing the cost of living issues for families here in San Diego.
Great. We have a lot of questions coming in right now asking about the courts and a potential constitutional crisis. I will read a couple of them. Apologies if I didn't combine all of the great questions we're getting. But Miriam L asks, how will you stop Trump from ignoring court orders? Mike C asks, by ignoring the recent judge's order on deportation, which you referenced, Trump has now openly broken a judge's orders. What's being done? And then Janet G says, I'm deeply troubled by the death of democracy by 1,000 cuts. We must stop Project 2025. Help us help you do that. What will be done if and when this administration snubs court orders and rulings?
So these are very, very important questions and something I'm spending a lot of time thinking about right now. Many of you know, before I came to Congress, I worked in post-conflict stabilization and post-coup transitions. And the democratic backsliding we're seeing here in the US is very, very dangerous and concerning. And it is something we've seen in other countries. And what we've seen from other countries is that if we can put together a broad-based pro-democracy, small d, pro-democracy movement, we actually have a pretty good chance of getting a better democracy on the other side, right? We want to make the backsliding a U instead of all the way down. But to do that, it's important that we continue to do the organizing work and talking to each other about what's happening and then being ready when some of these sort of triggers and red lines happen. So on the disobeying court orders, this to me, this combined with the due process and free speech things that we talked about a little bit earlier are some of the most concerning things we're seeing right now for our democracy and our democratic backsliding. My Republican colleagues, as I said, told me that this is their red line. So if so, they need to be speaking up right now because we are seeing it happen. And, talk to your friends and neighbors who live in other districts and encourage them to talk to their representatives because we need them to be feeling this pressure. And then we're going to need all of us to band together. And when these things happen, when we see him not abide by a Supreme Court order, we need to take to the streets like they did in South Korea when the president tried to institute martial law. The reason they were able to push back on that is because everyone in the country knew that that was wrong and pushed back together. And that's what we're going to need to do. And that's what we need to focus on and encouraging my Republican colleagues to be on our side.
All right, as a sort of follow-up to that, Colleen O asks, can you share what's happening in the House regarding impeachment of President Trump? Why aren't we pushing harder to impeach?
The honest answer is because we are in the minority and therefore we don't control what bills come up to the floor and impeachment wouldn't pass the House, let alone what we know would happen in the Senate.
All right, turning a bit now, but because Social Security and Medicare have obviously been in the news so much, Carol R asks, is there now or would you consider establishing a district senior citizens committee, which would focus on growing concerns of seniors and ways in which we seniors can be more proactive, given that many of us are not as mobile as we once were?
I love that idea, and I'm going to have my team get right on that. Thank you for the suggestion.
All right, easy enough. All right. Additional questions. Penny H asks, do you have any leverage now to stop the tariffs that are ruining our economy and making enemies of our allies after the Republicans ceded their authority to Trump?
So the answer is yes and no. The answer is no, in that one of the things the Republicans did in passing this continuing resolution was this very tricky parliamentary move that took away our ability to pass a bill that would get rid of these tariffs, which the authority that Donald Trump is using to institute these tariffs allows. I know that was all very complicated, but basically, we should have the ability to vote against these tariffs, but the Republicans took that away in the process of doing the continuing resolution. Yes, though, because we have seen that they are actually susceptible to public pressure and they do care. And I know a lot of my Republican colleagues care about this too. And so the more our small business owners, the more folks can speak up and talk about the impact these tariffs will have on their lives, on the rising cost of housing, for instance, here in San Diego, which we don't need anything to make it more expensive to have housing here in San Diego. Cost of groceries, gas will go up a lot under these tariffs. The more we're speaking up and again talking to our friends and neighbors who live in other districts who can call their representatives, the best chance we have to pushing back and making it so that they don't actually institute these tariffs.
All right, Jim M asks, I'm a veteran and a federal employee. As you know, 30% of federal employees are vets. That number is higher in the DoD. The Doge and Trump cuts to the VA are already having impact to my healthcare and services. What can a normal citizen do to fight these terrible and destructive policies?
Well, thank you for your service. And it's true. A lot of the folks being fired by Doge in the federal government are veterans. We are pushing back hard on all of these things. As I said, we've actually had success in the courts with a federal judge mandating that federal workers be rehired, and we're seeing 18 agencies do that. Um, Again, I feel like it's so frustrating because I feel like the tools we have are the same tools, which is we need to be telling human stories about the impact these have. A lot of times when people hear federal workforce, federal workers, they think of like a big, great building in Washington, D.C. with like faceless people. But the fact of the matter is, all of these programs impact our lives every day. You know, I talk to people who rely on Medicaid. I talk to people who rely on the VA for their health care, right? And the more we can be telling the real human stories about how these are impacting, that this isn't just a nameless, faceless monopoly money, but real people's lives being impacted. And the more we can tell that publicly, and again, to our friends and neighbors who live in other districts, the best success we have at pushing back on these.
Right. Mark M asks, what are you doing to get the nonpartisan IGs reinstated? If you can do nothing, how will you and the Democrats be involved with hiring the new IGs?
So we've even heard some Republican senators be concerned about what's happening with the IGs. Um, there is an active court case about this. We feel optimistic about what the courts will do here because the law is very clear. And you know, at the moment, we're working through that court case and trying to have our Republican colleagues speak up. But you know, unfortunately, again, like in the minority, there are just only so many tools that we have. And so we're really relying on the courts and our Republican colleagues to grow a spine, which I'm not holding my breath for, but I can hope for. Um, and then public pressure.
All right. Sharon N asks, or says, every day the administration cancels more NIH grants based on their political agenda or to put pressure on institutions that they disagree with politically. These grants went through the rigorous NIH review process and are in progress. What can be done to protect health research?
As I mentioned in my opening, just yesterday, I had a meeting with researchers from the Scripps Institute about what these NIH and NSF cuts will mean for their research and the way their research really impacts all of us, not just as jobs here in San Diego, but also the kind of medical breakthroughs that they're able to find with this basic research. Actually, they told me this really amazing thing, which is that like 15 years ago, they were researching an algae, I think, that disappears itself to hide from predators. And because of their basic science research on that, that molecule has now been used. I'm butchering all of this, but that molecule has now been used to successfully treat glioblastoma cancer. And that was all because of the basic science research that they did on this one algae that had this very specialized thing. So this research is really, really important for all of us and for our health. I'm also working with San Diego State and UCSD and other institutions here in San Diego that are going to be really impacted by these NIH cuts. I think, again, the most important thing is having you all help me translate how these cuts are actually going to impact us as real people. Because again, you hear NIH cuts, most people don't know what you're talking about. But not having research into curing cancers and Alzheimer's and all of these other things we know NIH goes into funding, people do care about that. And so, I was talking to a researcher the other day actually who has an NIH project that is looking into how teens' brains change on social media, right? That's something we should all want research on. We should all want to know. And so making sure we're, again, telling these stories. I'm sorry that I keep saying this, but this really is the best tool we have is telling our stories, making our voices heard, making sure people understand the real human impact of all of these cuts, whether it's NIH or NSF or Medicaid or name another program. That really is the best tool that we have to push back right now.
All right. Susan J asks, is Musk informed about the country's secret military plans vis-a-vis China?
I read that same news article that you're referencing. I don't know the answer. We are asking, we are demanding to know, but I am very concerned if he is because, for all of this classified stuff, first of all, it's unclear to me if he even has a security clearance. But second of all, everything is on a need to know basis, and I do not understand what his need to know is for this. And I'm very concerned about what it means, especially because we have not seen his financial disclosures. So we don't actually know what conflicts of interest he might have vis-a-vis China. I hope the answer is no. I don't know more than what has been publicly reported, but we are demanding answers.
All right. Nikki A asks, can you talk about HUD or low-income housing in La Mesa? What's going to happen? My complex has 200 apartments.
Yeah, so one of the things that the Republicans took out or cut in the continuing resolution was rental subsidies for people. And we know already Section 8 housing vouchers have a huge wait list here in San Diego. I think the last number I heard was it was 14 years long. 14 years to wait when you are already eligible for assistance in housing, right? That's a long time. It doesn't solve the problem. And so we know that, here in San Diego, they're worried about what these cuts could mean. I believe that the local folks who give out these vouchers, the county and the regional task force, are no longer giving out individual vouchers because they want to make sure that they can at least continue funding the vouchers that they've already given out. But, it's a real concern, and especially for those of us here who know that we have not just a housing cost crisis, but also a homelessness crisis. And these housing vouchers are some of the best tools we have to keep people in homes so that they don't fall into homelessness. Personally, if it were up to me, these would be a universal program. If you are eligible for it, you get it. Unfortunately, that's not how the system works right now. And that's why they were able to cut some of this funding. But it's a real concern. But my understanding is that if you currently have a voucher, there should be money to keep paying. So if you currently have a voucher and you're worried about that, reach out to the county and the regional task force, whoever was the entity who gave you that. But I wouldn't worry. It's more about the new vouchers that we know are important. And if your voucher is not getting funded or if you're having any issues, please reach out to my office. We can do casework for any federal agency, and we want to make sure that you're getting everything that you're eligible for.
All right. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We have many, many hundreds that we weren't able to get through, but we have time for one last one. And I will again plug the town hall on April 22nd that the Congresswoman mentioned, which is when we are happy to take questions again. Last question seems fitting, hopefully. Jim C. asks, is there any good news you can share or something to leave us hopeful?
Okay, this is a good question because I feel like I was a big downer here, and I don't want you leaving feeling down because I actually do think that there is hope. First of all, the court cases have largely been successful. And even though we're seeing some instances of the Trump administration not abide by court orders, in many other instances, they are actually, from everything we can see, abiding by them. And it has stopped some really bad things. The second reason I'm really hopeful is because all of you, because on a beautiful Saturday in San Diego, thousands of you are here listening and engaging. And that's the most important thing we can be doing. Showing up in community, continuing to make our voices heard, doing that deep relationship building, and not letting ourselves be self-censored or feel like we are alone and we are alone in this and we're the only ones who feel this way. And so that's what gives me hope because, as I said, in other countries, when we can build this broad-based coalition, we've actually seen lots of success in pushing back against democratic backsliding and actually getting a better democracy on the other side. And that's my North Star right now, how we make sure that we are one of those countries.
All right. Congresswoman, any final thoughts you want to share with folks?
Just want to thank you all so much for coming to this. As Amy said, we'll have our in-person town hall next month, April 22nd in El Cajon. I know we didn't get to so many of your questions. I see all of them coming through. If you have a question that we weren't able to get to, please feel free to reach out to my office, 619-280-5353, or at sarajacobs.house.gov. We want to get you an answer. We want to make sure we are being as responsive to you as possible. If you submitted a question, if you have given us your contact information, we will try and get you an answer on that as well. But mostly, I just want to say thank you because our democracy only works when everyone gets involved. And you all showing up today is getting involved and is making your voice heard. And I couldn't be more grateful for everything that you all are doing in this really difficult time as well. So thank you all so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay tuned for more information about our next town hall on April 22nd. Thanks.